Have you ever watched society just collectively lose its mind over something that, when you look back, seems kind of minor? Like when people were convinced video games were going to corrupt an entire generation, or some new trend was the absolute end of civilization. Well, today we're going to dissect that exact phenomenon. This is the anatomy of a public freakout.
And this quote, it just nails the core idea perfectly. A moral panic is like yanking the fire alarm because you smell burnt toast. I mean, think about it. The alarm is real, the chaos is real, people are evacuating, but the actual threat is completely, ridiculously overblown. It's that massive, disproportionate reaction that we're going to get into today.
So, how does that alarm get pulled in the first place? Well, that brings us right to section 1, the false alarm. Okay, so this term, moral panic, it comes from a sociologist named Stanley Cohen. And what he saw was these moments when some group or some issue is suddenly slapped with a label that says, hey, this is a threat to our values. And the key thing here, the really crucial part, is that the fear just spreads way, way faster than any of the facts. Emotion completely hijacks our rational judgment.
What's really fascinating is that these panics, they aren't random. They actually follow a pretty predictable 5-step pattern. First, there's a rising tide of concern about some group's behavior. Then that concern starts to harden into actual hostility. Pretty soon, a kind of consensus builds. Everyone seems to agree that, yep, this threat is real and dangerous. That, of course, fuels a wildly disproportionate reaction. And finally, the whole thing is incredibly volatile. It can just explode out of nowhere and then vanish just as fast.
Yeah, this viral fever analogy really captures that volatility. A moral panic isn't some slow burning issue. Nope, it spikes hard, it sucks up all the oxygen in the room, and then, poof, it can be gone just as quickly as it showed up. But every panic needs a focus, a target. And that brings us to the next essential ingredient, section 2, finding a villain. Cohen had this great name for these targets. He called them folk devils. And that's exactly what they are, the designated villains in our big social drama. They become this simple, easy-to-blame face for problems that are actually way more complex and widespread. And these so-called devils are rarely actual monsters. A lot of the time, they're just groups that are new or different, or maybe just misunderstood. Think about the mods and rockers back in the 60s, or the whole satanic panic of the 80s, or even today with all the fears about gamers or certain online communities. So, why do we create them? This quote explains it perfectly. When society is going through big changes, fear is this really powerful but kind of undirected energy. Folk devils are like lightning rods. They act as scapegoats, giving all that free-floating anxiety a target to zero in on. Okay, so you've got your villain. But a villain doesn't do much good hiding in the shadows. They need a spotlight. And this brings us to a huge piece of the puzzle. Section 3, fanning the flames. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The media isn't just a passive mirror reflecting what's happening. Not at all. It's an active participant. It's an amplification engine. It can take one little spark of concern and, through nonstop repetition and sensational headlines, turn it into a raging inferno. And here's a classic example of how that engine works. On the left, you've got reality. Maybe a few isolated incidents, totally disconnected. But then you look at the right. That's the media narrative. And suddenly, it's not a few incidents anymore. It's a dangerous new trend, an epidemic. It's all about how you frame the story. This magnifying glass analogy is just perfect. The media often ignores all the complex social issues, the foundation, the plumbing, the structure, and instead focuses on one tiny crack. Then they hold up the magnifying glass and declare the entire building is about to collapse. It's how a minor issue gets turned into an existential threat. So when the public is in a full-blown frenzy, the pressure builds on the people in charge to do something, and that leads us straight to section 4, the official overreaction. This is the point where the panic jumps from the headlines and starts having real-world consequences. Politicians, feeling the heat, have to respond. So you get new laws, you get more policing, increased surveillance, maybe even censorship, all designed to show everyone that they're being tough on this new, scary problem. This chart is the heart of the whole issue. It's all about that disproportionality we talked about. Just look at the mismatch. The little bar on the left, that's the actual harm being caused. And the huge bar on the right, that's the public and media reaction. It is completely, totally out of whack. To put it another way, it's exactly like this quote says. It is like bringing out military-grade weapons just to swat a few flies. The response is so far out of scale with the actual problem.
You're deploying this massive solution for a threat that might be tiny, or in some cases might not even exist at all. But here's the thing about these fevers of fear. They don't last forever. The media gets bored and moves on to the next big thing. So what's left behind when the panic finally dies down? Well, that brings us to Section 5, the aftermath. This timeline reveals something really critical. Okay, so the panic erupts. A new reactive law gets passed in a hurry. But then the media moves on. The public attention fades. The law, though, that doesn't just disappear. The institutional changes that were made in the heat of the moment, they often become permanent fixtures. And that's why this is such a perfect analogy. The storm passes, but the flood damage stays. The intense media attention, the public outrage, that's the storm. It's powerful, but it's temporary. But the new laws, the social stigma, the expanded powers of the state, that's the flood damage. It's left behind long after everyone's forgotten why it was even storming in the first place. All right, so let's pull the lens all the way back. If these panics aren't really about reality, then what are they about? What's really going on here? That brings us to our final section, what the panic reveals. Because ultimately, these panics are not random outbursts of madness. They are symptoms. The thing everyone is panicking about on the surface is just the tip of the iceberg. If you look underneath, you'll find the real drivers, deep social anxieties, a struggle over who gets to set the rules and enforce social norms, and sometimes it's just a great opportunity for certain groups to grab more power. And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway of the whole theory. That folk devil, that supposed threat, is really just a screen, a blank screen that we as a society project all of our collective anxieties onto, our fears about the future, about changing values, about who belongs and who doesn't. The panic isn't really about the monster, it's about the audience watching the movie. And that leaves us with a really critical question for the future. Because make no mistake, there will always be a next panic. So now that we have this framework, the choice is ours. Are we going to get swept up in the alarm bells? Or are we going to stop, take a breath, and check to see if somebody just burnt the toast?